and poverty. Oh, wake up all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. They're the ones who's coming up, and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. Na 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 na. The world won't get no better. We gotta change it now, just you and me. Wake up all the doctors, make the old people well. They're the ones who suffer and who catch all the hair. But they don't have so very long before their judgment day. So won't you make them happy before they pass away?
Welcome everyone to today's Leading with Justice speaker series presented by California State University Sacramento's Doctorate in Educational Leadership Program. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, SMUD, Sacramento Kings, Fresno State's Doctorate Program in Educational Leadership, and Sacramento Area Youth Speaks, along with the College of Education at Sacramento State.
We need to see the slides.
If you have a favorite quote of the day, please put that in the chat. And we'd love for you to share that with us on social media. If you can tag us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram. And if you use the hashtag Leading with Justice, we'd appreciate it. Just some housekeeping tips. This webinar is being recorded. Audience cameras and mics are not recorded. ASL interpreters and closed captions are provided, and closed captions can be enabled using the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom window. We have two ways to connect. If you'd like to share your thoughts and connect with the audience, you can add that to the chat if you have any technical questions. And for Q&A with the speakers after the talk, please put that in the Q&A section. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I walk on here in Sacramento was inhabited by others before me. Out of respect for these indigenous cultures, I proceed with today's events. And now I would like to introduce Faculty Director Vajra Watson.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Leading with Justice and our Lunch and Learn. Thank you so much for that introduction, Tina. Really appreciate it. Yes, so my name is Dr. Vajra Watson. I'm the proud faculty director of the Doctorate in Educational Leadership at Sac State. It is my honor to welcome all of you to the Fall 2021 Leading with Justice Speaker Series. We are building on the momentum from last year and are continuing to close the gap between theory and practice, between the world we want and the realities of today. In our first Lunch and Learn this year with school board member Mike Hutchinson and Professor Frank Adamson, we discussed how to put the public back into public education. Building on this theme, last week, Dean Pedro Noguera shared with us that, quote, Education is the most important work we can do if we're serious about justice. This is because learning is the soul of social change. We interact with our environment and one another based upon what we know and what we think we know. Our knowledge base shapes our interactions and perceptions. If we've been misguided or miseducated, then we might even destroy that which gives us life, like the earth itself. On many levels, these are perilous times, and yet we are surrounded by solutions and solutionaries. My close friend and colleague, Nicole Martinez, who teaches elementary school in San Juan Unified School District, shared with me that, quote, "Your walk is your way. Your walk is your way." Each of the scholars, school practitioners, and community organizers who were selected for this series embody this notion of walking with justice in their lives. As we continue to understand the why of justice, today's speakers will also illuminate the how of justice. Community organizing and teaching have many similarities, and the laborious planting of critical seeds into the mind and heart is certainly one of them. While none of us can control the wind or rain, we do know that seeds, when cared for, watered, nurtured, and nourished in healthy settings, blossom. This is where our possibility meets our imagination, where dreams meet the work in the world. How do we plant gardens of social justice where life and liberation thrive? We are here today, tilling the soil through these conversations and growing from this land, conscious of our roots and the legacies that give our work purposeful direction. It is from this place, inside an enduring pandemic and environmental crisis, that we discuss the role of higher education, scholar activism, and the ongoing battle against industrial agriculture. Before we begin, I want to give thanks to our partners and sponsors. The Leading with Justice series occurs because of support from the Sac State College of Education, SMUD, the Sacramento Kings, Fresno State's EDD program, and Sacramento Area Youth Speaks Says. Speaking of Fresno State, I'm excited that we have my colleague, Dr. Ignacio Hernandez, with us today. And before he comes on, let's ground our conversation with some youth voice. Colleen Cruz grew up in the small town of Lemoore in the Central Valley on stolen Yokut's land. She spent the past 3 years at UC Davis, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Community and Regional Development with a minor in education and Asian American studies, At UC Davis, she advocated for educational equity, ethnic studies, and social justice in her leadership roles. I know Colleen as a SAYS poet, mentor, educator who brought her head, heart, and feet into every classroom. She is wise, open, and absolutely fierce. Colleen currently serves as an educator for the American Farm School in Greece, where she supports the academic and personal development of high school students. So please give it up for Colleen Cruz.
Thank you, Dr. Vajra, for introducing me. I'm so excited to be a part of this event. But before I begin, I want to recognize that October is Filipino American History Month. This is very important because Filipino American history and Filipinx American history is often overlooked and ignored when we talk about the history of America. So I want to take a moment to bring awareness to the essential contributions of Filipino Americans, such as Larry Itliong and Philip Vera Cruz and other countless Filipinos who have been integral in farm labor rights, especially in the Central Valley. You see, I was raised in the heart of the Central Valley in a small town called Lemoore, where flat agricultural fields stretch for miles in each direction. You could take the 198 to the 5 or the 41 to the 99, but you'd drive for hours before you'd see anything resembling a city, like the city by the bay or the city of angels. If Lemoore were a city, it'd be called the city of no opportunity. Because I've heard, you only stay in Lemoore if you lack imagination. You only stay in Lemoore if you can tolerate racism. You only stay in Lemoore if you can't become anything more than a resident of the mundane. So I left. I turned my back on a town that I thought I knew inside and out because I memorized the back roads and where to dodge the potholes. But I knew nothing. I learned more about my home after I left it. I sat in a desk 200 miles away, reading articles about a hazardous waste dump that I pass on my way to LA, leaving babies with heart murmurs and cleft palates. I was classmates with a kid who lived not too far away. I sat in a desk 200 miles away, researching pesticide drift that poisoned the lungs of farm workers I'd pass along the highway, exacerbating asthma and miscarrying pregnancies. But there's not much they could do when healthcare is only available for the wealthy few. I sat in a desk 200 miles away, learning about groundwater contamination caused by synthetic fertilizer over-application, turning drinking water into poison for families to consume. I can't help but wonder why I learned about all of this after I left, and I wonder who is teaching those who stay. The Central Valley residents deserve clean air to breathe. They deserve clean water to drink and a home free from these environmental vulnerabilities. I've learned that leaving was the best thing that I could do so that I could become better for the home that I returned to. It's a crime to ignore the injustices in the valley when you know what I know, because my parents still live here, my best friend's just down the street, and my children will inherit this house even if I choose to leave. The community that raised me still walks on these streets, so I cannot be silent when we're being sacrificed by the elite. And when they ask me, why do I care so much? What is this for? I will say it is for my home, for the people of Lemoore. Thank you.
How beautiful. Thank you, Colleen. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ignacio Hernandez. I am an associate professor and the director of the doctoral program in educational leadership at Fresno State. Welcome. I am pleased today to offer an introduction for our two esteemed guests and panelists, Dr. O'Connell and Dr. Peters. Daniel O'Connell is the executive director of the Central Valley Partnership, a regional nonprofit organization and progressive network of labor unions, environmental organizations, and community groups spanning the San Joaquin Valley. Trained as a multidisciplinary ethnographer, he holds an MS in International Agricultural Development from the University of California, Davis, and a PhD in education from Cornell University. As a politically engaged scholar, his work is dedicated to achieving social, racial, environmental, and economic justice in California. Scott Peters is a professor in the Department of Global Development at Cornell University and a historian of American higher education's public purposes and work. He has spent the past 20 years as a leader in the civic engagement movement in American higher education, most recently serving as faculty co-director of Imagining America, Artists and Scholars in Public Life. He is the lead author of Democracy and Higher Education, Traditions and Stories of Civic Engagement. He is also co-editor of the Cornell University Press book series, Publicly Engaged Scholars, Identities, Purposes, and Practices. They've co-authored a book titled In the Struggle, Scholars and the Fight Against Industrial Agribusiness in California. We're pleased to welcome Dr. O'Connell and Dr. Peters. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. We are really honored to be in the presence of such great power. I have long admired, ever since I met Vajra and her colleagues, the poet mentors in the work of SES. I have long admired what's happening in Sacramento, and it really is just a great honor to be here with all of you. Dan and I would like to share an overview of the book with you now, some of the highlights of what's in the book and how we came to create it. We're eager to open the conversation up to some back and forth with questions, to hear also hopefully other people's perspectives. So I just like to make a beginning by saying a few words about what this book is before handing it off to Dan to talk in detail. This book is a set of three interconnecting themes. It's really very much at the heart of this book. The first theme is that the book is an analysis and critique of industrial agribusiness. It delineates a geography and a critical topography across time and history of the construction and maintenance of an unjust and oppressive structure in the Central Valley of California. So the book does that. But the book isn't just a critical landscape and history of an oppressive set of structures. The book is also a tutorial and guidebook on how to resist and fight back. We often always, when we are sharing this book with others, wanting to land in a hopeful place as we move through a conversation with people. The hope comes from the inspiration of the characters in the book that you meet, who show us how to fight back through stories they share about their work and experience. The third theme that the book interweaves together is an expression of really critical core values, the most important of which is the value and importance of community. There are so many other words that we associate with words like democracy that don't really communicate the power and resonance of what we feel when we hear words like democracy. But this book, every chapter in the book is an expression, every character in this book is an embodied expression of these set of values. So all three of these themes are woven together in the book. And the book is primarily a set of stories authored by 10 people. Dan and I are not the only authors of the book. Each chapter, each of the 8 core chapters of the book is filled with stories told directly in the voice of the activist scholar, the politically engaged scholar that chapter features. I wanted to put this in the chat, but I didn't have time to copy it and put it in here. But I do have a favorite quote of the day that actually is also my favorite quote in this whole book that I keep coming back to. I want to read that, and I want to offer a teaching from another one of our members. So the cover of the book features a photograph of Ernesto Galarza, who's one of the 8 scholars in the book. And one sentence that comes from Galarza's chapter I want to share here. And I think about this when I think of the power of the work that I know you all are doing in Sacramento. I think it captures the spirit of what you're doing quite well. And that painting over Vajra's shoulder reminds me of this quote too. So Ernesto Galarza said, "A mind placed at the forward edge of events and guided by knowledge uses the past, affects the present, and possibly helps form the future." A mind placed at the forward edge of events and guided by knowledge uses the past, affects the present, and possibly forms the future. Every one of the scholars in this book embodies that sentence, because every one of the scholars in this book was a mind placed at the forward edge of events. I want to say that while the book includes 8 scholars, it's important to note that only 4 of those 8, only half, were employed by colleges and universities. The other 4 were employed by nonprofits. They were independent of the institution of a college or university. And that is an important fact to highlight the truth that knowledge and theory are generated throughout society by people who are on that, what Galarza says, that forward edge of events. And scholars can do that too when they get off their campuses and place themselves at that forward edge of events. So the one last thing I'll say here before handing it to Dan to give an expansive view into the book is that Isao Fujimoto, who's one of the 8 scholars in the book, once often teaches something important by saying that, he says, it is said that if we're going to make any sense of what we are doing, we have to know what story we are in. Listening to Colleen's beautiful poem, we know what story people are in the Central Valley. We hear it in Colleen's poem. Each one of the scholars in the book shares many stories to help us all know not only what story we are invited to jump into and to join into in terms of California's Central Valley and the structures of oppression with industrialized agribusiness, but the larger story we are on in the planet, hearkening back to Vadra's opening words here today. So, Dan.
It was so nice to hear Colleen speak. In so many ways, this book was written for Colleen and many other people in the San Joaquin Valley, in California, and in other areas in the country and the world that are being structurally oppressed, especially along racial lines, in areas where the economy is consolidated and land holdings are monopolized. It's a form of exclusion that is threatening our democracy today. The book gives a language. It is a critical topography that lays out a terrain over 100 years through stories and narratives. And the reason we map this terrain is so that it can be attacked and navigated well, both just to survive, but also we hope as forms of resistance. And finally, I'm very hopeful for the San Joaquin Valley that we're at a moment where demographically, this place is shifting. We have a pretty progressive state, and we have this very reactionary holdover of a region that I think is at the cusp of change within the next decade to 15 years. I often say that the book was designed as ammunition. I learned that you can form research in ways to articulate the world through Tom Lyson at Cornell when he wrote a small article on rural schools and their utility for community building. And he did it to achieve a policy outcome in a small town. This is a book to make policy outcomes and organizing strategies, and finally to win a fight in one of the most endemically, structurally unequal, segregated and oppressed regions in the United States, on a par with the Mississippi Delta or regions like Appalachia. Sometimes when I'm discussing the book to people that don't live in the San Joaquin Valley, I mention to them that geographies by definition are designed. And this particular geography in the San Joaquin Valley is the most productive food producing region in the history of the world. And yet it has the highest levels of pollution and poverty and hunger in the United States. And some of the most hungry folks here are the farm workers themselves, who themselves are often farmers that have been driven off farms in central Mexico, for instance, after NAFTA undercut the price of corn and drove those folks here. So even the word farm worker is an inherently racist term that the English language uses to define this subjugation that's happening here. I come from an activist background. I was frustrated that the methods that I was doing when I was young weren't working. And I tried everything from direct action to civil disobedience to mass actions. The book is a form of activism. It's teaching us how to use knowledge in the fight. I sometimes say then, in an effort like students in the 1960s wanted relevant education, that the book is a slow motion punch thrown across 2 decades just for myself. As of its publication in July, it landed. And maybe we'll get to a little bit of how and we hope that the book can be used now. But Scott and I wanted to introduce you to the book. It has 10 authors, 8 of whom are subjects of the book, telling their own stories. Walter Goldschmidt, Paul Taylor, Ernesto Galarza, Dean McCannell, Isao Fujimoto, Don Villarejo, Trudy Wisterman, and Janaki Jagannath. Scott and I, and when I'm talking to young organizers in the Valley, I often turn to Galarza. For me, looking in history, I like the work that Antonio Gramsci did in Italy, facing off against fascism in the 1920s against Mussolini. Mussolini's prosecutor once said, "Let's stop this brain from working for 20 years." I think that Galarza, born in Mexico in 1905, the revolution hit. He moves to Sacramento, where he worked as a farm worker. He took innumerable jobs in his youth, ending up at Occidental College for his undergraduate degree. He got a Master's of Science, an MA at Stanford, and he went on to get his PhD at Columbia University. Raised from that background, you would expect him to become a faculty member, but instead, he ends up getting a job and taking on a position as with the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which had renamed itself out here to confront industrial agribusiness. Ernesto Galarza takes his PhD, pockets it, and heads out into the San Joaquin Valley and Imperial Valley and the rest of California to organize workers. We thought that we'd read you a few sections of him offering his testimony and his invitation and his warnings to the youth and to all of us to engage at this critical moment. The first one is a conference he gave in 1959 after he had just been kicked out of the union and lost his job and is reflecting back on his work. He's talking to students. "I reacted with intense interest to a remark that was made this morning that one of the difficulties of the Mexican American community is that it had not pinpointed the enemy. I ought to tell you that some 15 or 20 years ago, more than that perhaps, I asked myself the very same question. I had been working and living with farm workers in this state. I had moved with them up and down the state for many years, coming at last to the conclusion that one of our difficulties was that we had not defined the target. Who was the enemy? So I spent some 10 years of my life in an experiment. What happens to a Mexican American community and those who presume to lead it when they do pinpoint the enemy? And we did. I helped to organize some 20 locals of farm workers in this state from Yuba City to the Mexican border. It was a continuous effort, not only to organize the farm workers, but to try to help them understand where the enemy was. I think we succeeded. In fact, the best evidence that we did succeed is that we were so thoroughly destroyed. In some 10 years of what I like to call dynamic research, and by this, I mean that in areas of social experience where information is awfully hard to get at because it's so very closely guarded, the only way to get it is to go out and not ask for the information, but to challenge those who are keeping it to themselves. In California, it became obvious to me that the way to get at an understanding of why farm labor was so exploited and lived so miserably in 100 hamlets in the state, the way to do that was to engage the enemy. So we did. We organized with the purpose of taking down a peg or two the power of the Associated Farmers of California, of the banks and insurance companies who have a very high investments in agriculture, and of institutions that carry a role in the background as investors and manipulators of wealth. Step by step, in a series of strikes, we challenged that power. We named institutions and we named persons. We named places. Through the years, the picture unfolded, but to the degree that we did define the opposition grew in strength and in determination to destroy the Union, and it did destroy the Union. I want to warn every Mexican American who thinks him or herself as a leader, before he or she puts together an organization of any kind that is going after specific targets of power, I want to warn them, they're asking for some pretty rough treatment. One of the things we found out, for instance, was that the agencies of government, they are not Mexican-American agencies. They're not inventions of the Mexican peasant to come to this country. They're agencies of the state and federal power were conniving, collaborating, and conspiring with the economic power structure to destroy the Union, and they did. Now, the story of how that destruction was accomplished is a very important story. I've written a couple of chapters of it, and I commend it to you now with no sense of immodesty, because it not only describes a specific instance in the destruction of a growing community among farm workers in this country, but it describes how that destruction was accomplished. I think that any challenge to the power in these democratic United States is going for now to run into the same sorts of difficulties. I was going to read another portion from Galarza, but I think I'll stop there. The entire book is filled with these lessons from the empirical studies that were done over time, studies that showed that federal laws were not implemented for over 40 years, even after 9-0 Supreme Court decisions mandating that they were to be implemented. It is, I often say, like Chinatown on steroids. We've just come off of a series, a week of talking about the book in the Valley and over on the coast. We started at Fresno City College, then Fresno State. The next night, College of the Sequoias. How meaningful it was for Scott and I to start predominantly with community colleges, these young folks that are just launching out into the world, to help them orient and understand the world that they live in and are inheriting, and how to negotiate it and potentially fight back if they want. When we talk to these folks, I sometimes say, you're going to need to be brave to read the book, because the book is going to imply that it's going to teach you how we're being taken advantage of, how your parents were oppressed, and the same systems are still in place today. The book illustrates that there is a form of neo-feudal domination active in California, and not only passively trying to control the economic interests that they have now. The head of the Westlands Water District, or the general counsel, a guy named Bernhardt, went on to be the Secretary of the Interior. This is a region that elects Devin Nunes and Kevin McCarthy. And still, the boards of supervisors here represent these ag businesses that are oppressing us. We haven't won the fight. The power structure is still in place here. I am so heartful and hopeful, especially of the artistic voices that are coming out of the Valley and the organizing that's happening here. Perhaps Chicago and the San Joaquin Valley have some of our country's most interesting and heroic histories of community organizing, going back to Dolores Huerta and Cesar, and before that to folks like Galarza. Those stories of organizing are in this book too, and how scholars collaborated with labor movements in immigrant communities to protect them and to create change. Those are all there now, protected into the future. It gives me so much solace and relief that the stories are now there for everyone to access. There's a metaphor in the book, and I'll end with this and maybe pass it back to Scott afterwards. It's a metaphor of the river. The river is this movement of knowledge and commitment from these scholars and from the community members to get in the fight. I wonder now, the book has been out for a month or two. I sued Devin Nunes over his ballot designation as a farmer, and I expected goons. My wife and I expected to have hooligans on our doorstep. Similarly, not as violently though, I expected more of a reaction. There's three axioms. There's a number of axioms at the end of the book. Three of them are really important for people who are going to do this work as activist scholars. Expect political reaction. Second, and most important, pressure indicates relevance, and persevere through adversities. That pressure I expected to be immediate, and now Scott and I are beginning to speak of this book, and will increasingly do so in the years to come. But it hasn't elicited a blowback right in our face right off the bat. And so I ponder about that metaphor from Wischermann's chapter on the river, and how water acts on structures, how it embeds slowly into interstitial spaces between things to erode their integrity, their solidities, their bearing. We have formidable power structures active in the valley, in our state, and in our country. We have to keep hammering at them. The book is one of those, both a weapon to be wielded and a strategic map to help you negotiate the way, and a few lessons on methods and tactics to try to be most effective. And in the book, you'll see some people lose their fights, even heroic fights that took decades of commitment by very smart people. We will learn now from their mistakes and re-up and get in the fight again. It hasn't stopped. And I just want to invite everyone into acknowledging and realizing what's happening in the San Joaquin Valley of California that we're permitting to happen, that Colleen Cruz expressed so eloquently. We cannot allow these folks to be left out and vulnerable. We need to change the system here. And if we do succeed here in the San Joaquin Valley, it might be a model that we can apply to other places in the country. I'll stop there and hand it back to Scott. Thank you.
We'd very much like to move to an interaction. So I'll just say a few words here before we open it up. Dan mentioned Shrudi's invocation of the river. At the end of our conversation with her, she said to us, as much of a challenge as it was a recognition, she said, "Welcome to the river, brothers." The book put me in touch with this river, the study with Dan of the sweeping cinematic nature of the 8 scholars across 100 years of time, viscerally put me in touch with this flowing river, which I want to say is gaining in strength and power. I'm not from California. Thanks to Dan, I've spent a lot of time there. Thanks also to moving Imagining America's headquarters to University of California at Davis. But even though I'm not from California, I feel and see the power of what's happened over the 100 years that the book covers. I also see something really clearly that I couldn't see before, and I think this is really important. I'd like to end our presentation by illuminating this. Those of us who are not from California, but who have studied something about the history of agriculture and food systems and farm workers, many of us think that, perhaps have thought, including me, when we think of California, what we think of is a story that is a tragedy. That's the story. I think of Esau's question, we need to know what story we are in. I think of the story of California, or I used to think of the story of California as just a terrible, terrible tragedy. But what these 8 scholars in this book illuminate for us is a different story. It's a story, with Trudy's metaphor of the river, of a great flow of activist scholars engaged on the leading edge and the forward edge of events, as Ernesto Galarza said, building knowledge, building theory, testing it through their work. This is a story that is rising, unlike the tragedy, the declining plot line of the tragedy. This story has a rising plot line that's growing in power. The 8th scholar in the book is Janaki, grounded in agroecology, an international movement of great power. We are left with hope. We are left with possibility. We are left with not just a feeling of pain or wincing as we jump into the river, but a feeling of joy. There is joy in this work because we are in fact building power. The river is growing. The river is moving faster. This book only illuminates the smallest bit of it. I hope that scholars will read this book and want to show us other scholars of the past 100 years who've been in this river, and to be one of those scholars in this river. So we're pleased to be here with you today, and would very much like to open this to conversation and questions now.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for all of our participants who are with us online. Dr. Shiva Savadi says, thank you both for being here and for sharing about this exciting project. If possible, I'm wondering if you can speak about the connection between the development of industrialized agriculture in California and the connection or role of public land grant universities in developing new knowledges or technologies to support these industries. So insights in that topic.
Can I go first, Scott?
Yes, please.
It's an intensely, the land grant system in California was utterly implicated in this, the creation and management of industrial agribusiness and its oppressive structures, utterly, totally there. So, and I'll just lay out a few of the points. So Dr. Savadi, it's just the most important question, and it's in the book, it lays it out. One of the factors that isn't in the book is that the Farm Bureau was created and housed at UC Berkeley for 30 years. When the creation of the cooperative extension system was put into place at that time, they didn't want to partner with the Grange, the progressive smaller farmers. They wanted to industrialize. The Grange actually sued the University of California to get the Farm Bureau out of UC Berkeley. Secondly, huge narrative here is that the University of California has 3 land grant schools: Riverside, Davis, and Berkeley. Berkeley was more powerful in the beginning, and now it's really this. Davis is an ag school of the world, right? Get this one. The discipline of rural sociology was never permitted here. They never had a department. They never, to our knowledge, hired a rural sociologist in the history of California's land grant until the 1960s and 70s. Imagine that. Wisconsin, Cornell, Purdue, all of these other schools had robust departments of rural sociology. The University of California's land grant system never was going to enable, even allow or permit a question to be asked about their dominant economic system that they were constructing. And then moving forward, the story of the tomato harvester is in here. The litigation that happens from CRLA and Don Villarejo's California Institute for Rural Studies is there. How it drove farm workers off of the land without compensating them. And finally, there's a wonderful story that Don Villarejo tells of the Kellogg Foundation offering the University of California millions of dollars to hire 5 farm labor advisors after their incredible century of subsidizing agribusiness, which continues today with GMOs and every other form. This was not going to cost them anything to hire 5 farm labor advisors just to look at this and advise farm laborers. They met at the chancellor's offices over in Oakland, and one of the administrators started off with Don and said, Don, you have to understand, this institution isn't a democracy. So I'm not going to end with this. Scott doesn't like me to go negative, but I'm going to tell you the book lays out all of this. And then I will also say that Paul Taylor was permitted to survive. He wasn't fired while though the FBI investigated him and other things at University of California, Berkeley. And when the research starts moving forward at Davis in the 1960s and 70s with Dean McCannell and Don Villarejo and Isao Fujimoto, they were also protected. There's a story in this book of the dean of the ag school of Davis warning that Dean McCannell could be killed because of his research, and many other similar stories that are in this that'll give you the backstory of the complicity of the institutions, but also at the very minimum, they allowed the research to go on after a numbers of fights and advocacy from the community to get our public universities geared towards serving our actual communities and not industrial agribusiness. That's all there for you in the book. I just touched on a few little points there.
Thanks, Dan. This is a big and important theme. I'm actually writing a new book on the history of the land grant mission right now. when Dan says that Scott doesn't like it when he goes negative, what he's meaning is I am trying to illuminate historical threads of people who have stood up for the kinds of things we stand up for today, of equity and democracy and those sorts of things. The history of the land grant institution and system is a conflicted and mixed history. The dominant thread has been one that has aligned with industrial agribusiness in California and in other states. There has been a kind of marginalization of attention to community and democracy and the sorts of things that the book highlights. I want to say that one interesting sort of artifact is on the Berkeley campus. Emblazoned all the way across Hillgard Hall on that campus in Berkeley is a phrase. And the phrase is, to rescue for human society the native values of rural life. That's the phrase that's all the way across the top of that building. That phrase is a good discussion starter. Why do these values need to be rescued? What are the values? What are these native values of rural life? Paul Taylor, who's one of the characters in the book, one of the scholars in the book, made a point of writing a whole piece just about the interpretation of that line. And he was fired with great anger that his institution, Berkeley, which was the home institution of the land grant for a long time in California, was not embracing what he thought it should be embracing with respect to how he understood those values and how they were operationalized through faculty members' research and student curriculum and things like that. So there are very close connections. It's a really good question. We could spend a great deal of time talking more about it. I'd just like to punctuate that while the history is full of things beginning with the stolen land, it's full of white supremacy. I mean, I'm reading things from the 1850s, 60s, and 70s right now, and it's impossible you are just hit right over the head with white supremacy by the talks that were given at the founding of these institutions. While our history has all of that, it's also managed to attract people who've taken up different projects and who've tried to advance those projects. And we hope that the book gives encouragement today for those people to step up and claim their part of this public institution, which is for all of us. It's paid for with public tax dollars. It's there to benefit, supposed to be there to benefit the public. Ernesto Galarza says a lot about this in his chapter. So I think I'll leave it at that.
We appreciate these threads that you are both pulling together. Another great question comes from Sandy Fowler. What do you see as the path forward for California agriculture, which is critical to the health and nutrition across the United States, in rectifying their structures while still being competitive on a global food market?
I'll go first. First of all, the book lays it out with Janaki Jagannath's chapter. I think that we can take a lot of lessons from the Global South and the movements that are happening there, particularly around agroecology. So I think we have a name, a practice, a science, and a movement under and with agroecology that expresses and a revolutionary or more radical version that includes land reform and ideas of land occupation or taking back the land, which the book will show you. If you lose control of the land, it starts eroding your democracy. The word latifundia is used by Paul Taylor and Dorothea Lange. So I do think that we have a hint at the end of the book towards where we're going. And recently, Scott and I have been joined by Janaki, Carmen Cortez, who's a agroecology organizer out of Watsonville, and even Miguel Altieri, who just finished his time at Berkeley, and I think experienced some of the same pressures that our scholars did during his time at Berkeley when he was there. Finally, I wanted just to name some of the power structures that are in place now that we should transform. The Westlands Water District and all property weighted water districts. We have a system, Westlands Water District is a 600,000 acre special district, is a form of government, and they apportion voting by how many acres you have, not one person, one vote. So if you have no acres, no votes. And if you have 100,000 acres, you get 100,000 votes. And in 1983, that was upheld by the Rehnquist Supreme Court. Yet this is a California law. Let's change that law. I think we have definite objects of power. The power structure we'll know has transformed when we have majority people of color on all the boards of supervisors down here. And we need to be looking at the redistricting process that's underway right now to make sure those lines are drawn fair. So there's innumerable fights on a micro level on up to the macro level that we can engage in here. Thanks for the question.
Scott, did you want to jump in as well, or should I go to the next question?
I'll just say, not being from California, I can't say too much here, but I would just point to one thing, which is in the spirit of the book and of what we've learned from the characters. There are people who are already building an agriculture system of the future that embodies the kind of aspirations and values. They are generating knowledge on the forward edge of events that Ernesto Galarza is talking about. So one of the things that I think those of us who are in colleges and universities are challenged to do is to ask how can we support those knowledge makers? How can we support those scholars? What can we do to use the resources of our institutions to help them deal with what they're coming up against and to help strengthen the work that they are doing of not just building a new agriculture, but generating new knowledge and theory that is very powerful.
Appreciate that. Professor Frank Adamson asked the question. Thank you both for the presentation. You used the term neo-feudal. Are there structural links between big ag, water rights, carbon dependency, and financial support, and others? What are the links between California, national, and international levels?
The links are absolutely there, Frank, and they're delineated to a certain extent, some of them in the book. Again, let's go to the west side of the San Joaquin Valley. And I just invite you, when you're driving in the future between Los Angeles and, if you're not from California, because I think there's people from all over the country on the call, when you visit San Francisco and you're on your way to LA, you're going to be taking the 5 freeway, probably down the 5, not the 99, which runs on the east side of the valley. The 5 is on the west side of the valley. Exit that freeway and head inland, head west, head east. Go to places like Firebaugh and Mendota and Huron, and you will see how this is playing out right now in our country. Water rights are integrally connected to land ownership, and land ownership is extraordinarily unequal and has consolidated over time due to the factors in this book. I use the word neo-feudal, and I think we all know that right now there's a threat of just increasing fascism in our country, but neo-feudal is a more economic term and one that I think applies here. We did have a formal set of way of importing labor under the Braceros. After that, labor was encouraged to come here, and those folks had children here, et cetera, but there is many undocumented folks that are living here. Somewhere between probably 70 and 80% of farm labor is undocumented. And imagine those folks do pay taxes, they just don't get any services. So and they cannot vote, importantly. So we have a system where you have property weighted voting on top of people that are being taken advantage of by their labor in ways that it's very difficult for them to speak up and resist. And in John Nicky's chapter, you both are introduced to the terrain of the west side of the valley, and you'll see how the system pressures some of the organizers to quiet them in her chapter. I will then finally mention that I'm vested in fighting in the valley. I think Phil McMichael might be on this call, and other scholars can connect the dots internationally, and maybe Scott can, but I haven't done that work. I'm keep my nose to the ground just down here in the valley. So Scott, maybe you can comment on the broader national and international points.
Well, like all the other questions, these are big, really important questions that can generate a lot of conversation. And I'm looking at what time it is and wondering if Vajra, we might have another question that we could bring in here rather than me trying to venture off into that territory myself.
Yeah, that's fine. So I have, I'm going to close this with, I'm going to say 3 questions, and you guys can answer all 3 or just one of them, whatever so moves you. One is, how do you define and understand scholar activism? So how do you define and understand scholar activism? The second one is, what does training in scholar activism really look like? How do we shape, shift, and support the next generation of scholars? And the final question is, what is your relationship to the land, and what does the land teach you?
Wow, thank you. You know, I think about those questions, all three of them, every single day. I am blessed to receive students like Dan, who came to Cornell out of the decades of activism and political work that he had engaged in, searching for new avenues of power and thinking that there may be some useful tools in the academy with folks who were there, ways of studying, ways of making knowledge, ways of building theory, and not just doing that on a campus, but in the world, with the world. I will respond to the second question about the training most directly, given the limited time. And I will say that the most important thing that I have learned in my 22 years at Cornell is, for every student that I am blessed to work with in a classroom or in a graduate program, I want to see that student. I want to hear that student. I want to know what that student's aspirations are. What are their dreams? What do they hope to accomplish? What are they trying to figure out? I think what we need to do in the academy is make spaces for those voices and dreams and aspirations to be voiced and shared, so that students don't think they're just alone. They're the only one who's wanting to be an activist scholar, to be engaged in politics and the world of politics. They need to know they're not the only one. They need to know there's a history of this kind of work. But most importantly, they really need to hear each other's voices, express their own aspirations and dreams and hopes. That's the central responsibility I think we have in the academy for training a new generation, educating a new generation, is really to not miss them, to make sure we see them and hear them, and to make spaces for that deep, careful listening that is both, I feel, speaking for myself, an individual thing I do with each student, but also a collective thing. We must have spaces where students can hear and speak together.
It's interesting to pair the words scholar and activist, because scholar comes laden with a lot of baggage, right? And I'm going to tell you that you do not need to have any formal education to be a scholar. Everyone is making meaning out of their world, and we have to actually radically upend the idea of who knows things and who's teaching. And that is so fundamental, and you see it. Everyone is, especially the people that are being taken advantage of and are oppressed, are actually theorizing and strategizing constantly on how to survive. They just have a boot on their neck and can't really get up. They are more vested than anyone. And if we, in our positions as administrators and faculty, can help both those community members and witness our students that are coming from these families and communities as knowledge producers, co-learning, radical co-learning, that's key. So a scholar activist is not somebody with degrees after their name. It's not somebody, you could, and there's benefit to getting that training. And certainly Reed Galarza's chapter is inviting us into these public spaces where only these knowledges are available, folks like yourselves and the libraries, etc. Secondly, the training. I just want to invite everyone to learn from the great teacher that's in this book, Isao Fujimoto. Both his optimism coming from internship, the terrible injustices he experienced as some of the first scholars of color into the University of California, that prejudice and the institutional constraints, but also the joy he embedded in his students and how he empowered undergrads to go into the Mississippi Delta, into Appalachia, and into the San Joaquin Valley to create change. And finally, Vadra, in answer to your question about land, land for me is the basis to create imaginaries of possibility. So we need to reclaim the land. It should never have been privatized, right? I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the north of Namibia. Those tribes did not commodify land to have individual ownership. Similarly, the native folks of California did not do this. It's immoral. And we need to begin to talk about land reform and forms of collectivized sharing of land and not allowing resources like water to be privatized as well in connection with the land. So I have great hope in community land trusts, in borrowing from the Mexican Revolution's history of ejidos, in trying to maybe reclaim some land and begin a movement in that regard. They create imaginaries of possibility. Land.
Yes, land creates imaginaries of possibility. I think I'm paraphrasing you, but what a powerful statement to land on. And just this, what I hear echo throughout your work is the ways that people are the experts of their own lives, and what it means to even reclaim our understanding of power and the stories that we're in. So I am excited. We have copies of your book that we will be distributing in our program. And for folks that are on this call, I'll put my contact information in, or you can connect with the EDD office and we'll be happy to mail you a copy of the book. And I also put a link in the chat if you just want to buy it directly and support it that way. Please come back next week. We will be with Professor Lee Patel. We have a theme. Her new work is called No Study Without Struggle, Confronting Settler Colonialism in Higher Education. She is a close friend and colleague, and I'm really excited that we'll be bringing her into the mix with all of you. And then just to close out, we actually didn't do Dan and Scott's walk-on song, so we're gonna have a walk-out song. So please enjoy some Get Up, Stand Up by Bob Marley, and have a beautiful Wednesday and continue to connect joy and justice. And thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dan. Thank you to our ASL interpreters. Thank you, almighty powerful Colleen. And thank you, Tina, for holding it down technologically. I hope everybody has a beautiful day. Thank you.
Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's not all that glitters is gold. Half the story had never been told. So now you see the light. Hey, stand up for your right. Come on, get up.